stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting. We share stories for many reasons, to persuade, to entertain, to connect. What we sometimes forget is the impact of the stories we tell ourselves. Whether you're sharing personal stories or business stories, how you share them makes a difference in how you remember them and in how you're perceived by the people you're interacting with. When you figure out which stories to share, difficult bosses and coworkers, successes, failures, the next step is to develop how you share them. Have you figured out your patterns, your roles in those successes, the discomfort, and your challenges? In this series, you'll hear stories that will resonate with you. You'll nod your head in understanding, and then we'll dig into the lessons from each of those. How many times have you been sharing a story only to be interrupted by a person eager to share his own? When I'm working with clients on communication skills, I remind them to listen for understanding, not to respond. But during this podcast, I'm asking you to listen and consider your own related stories, to listen and consider which stories in your life might have impacted you in a similar way. I'm here today visiting with my friend Tiffany Ann. She is somebody I met on LinkedIn, and she has this great website and podcast called Dreams Recycled. And I was totally attracted to that name because I find it really and it kind of very expressive when it comes to people who are starting over or transitioning into something else. And so many of the people that I speak with and coach and interview are in some form of transition. And so I reached out to Tiffany Ann and we connected, and I'm just so grateful to have her on the show. So thank you, Tiffany, for joining me.
Hi, Sarah. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I always start with the podcast. I always start by asking you to share something about yourself that most people don't know. And it's usually, not something people would find on a resume or your LinkedIn profile. And it's usually something that people that know you now wouldn't know about you from your past. So do you have something you could share with us?
I actually do. And actually, what I have to share is actually really funny because I was doing it this morning. Sounds ominous. But before obviously my divorce, I was married for 16 years. I had 3 children. I was a stay-at-home mom. So during that time, I was fortunate enough. I didn't have to worry about money very much. I just had people fix stuff and redecorate stuff and do stuff. But then during my divorce and after my divorce, obviously financial circumstances changed drastically. And I found a secret hidden talent that I have, which is I can decorate and do all kinds of things to do with parties and redecorating and home improvements and fixing things crazy, crazy cheap.
Awesome. So what were you doing this morning?
Well, I was doing some last minute stuff to my daughter's room. I completely redecorated it. I had bought a headboard and repainted it and got her new bedding. And then I had hung up these $9 fairy lights that twinkle behind her bed, and looks like a show house kind of room, but it cost me totally less than $200.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I was messing around in there, finishing up some stuff.
That is so great. I love that because I can totally relate to it.
Yeah.
I was always raised in relatively new homes. My parents would have a relatively new home all the time. And when we moved into our home in Helena, it was built in 1890. It's an 1890 Victorian.
Oh, that's insane. Yeah.
And I was sure I loved it. I wanted this house. And we've been in it for 19 years, which is longer than my husband and I have ever lived in one town by at least 3 or 4 times longer than anywhere we've ever lived. Yeah. And I remember walking through the house with him. I had seen a bunch of houses and he hadn't come with me. And I finally found this one. And I said, you need to see this one. And I will never forget, he walked in the house and he agreed that it was beautiful and it would be perfect for us. But he said to me, this is a project house, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember saying, well, yeah. And I was thinking, I can paint. I really didn't understand what he meant by project house. And I didn't ask for any detail because I figured I'd deal with it when the time came.
You're like, and it surprise.
Exactly. It was only a few years later that we were doing the demo work in our one full bathroom. So we have 1.5 baths, and there are 4 of us. And at the time, our boys were really little. Max wasn't even born yet. And my husband and I were in this little bathroom doing the demolition work in there with a sledgehammer and
I've done that.
hammers and big screwdrivers. And, the mask on our face. And I was thinking, oh, this is what he meant by project house.
Well, and it started off for me, obviously, necessity, right? I didn't have money to fix the garbage disposal. So I'm like going, how to fix the garbage disposal, wiki how. And then the more you do it, the more empowered you are to go, what else can I tear out? Fix? Yes. And it's become kind of like a little bit of an obsession. Like, I used to throw these crazy birthday parties to my kids, and now I can throw them a birthday party for like $50.
Oh my gosh.
And it used to be crazy. And so I'm like obsessed with now not spending money and seeing kind of the extreme version of how different I can make something on a crazy low budget.
I love that. It's such a challenge. And when you do it and people are like, oh my gosh, this looks so good. I love that feeling.
I think it's easy. I mean, it's not easy. It's definitely man labor work, but it's easy now. I mean, you can always get a deal. You can always get a bargain. You can always source something on, Google eBay or Amazon or whatever, eBay. And then also you can find out how to do it, right? Before you wouldn't have, I wouldn't have known how to do any of the stuff that I've managed to do. I've laid tile, I've done crazy stuff, which like people don't know about me. So that's definitely a hidden thing.
I love that. I'm so glad you shared that with me. It reminds me of when my husband was out of town and our oven heating element, the gas igniter went out. And my son, Jacob, our older son, was probably 8 or so. And I remember going to YouTube and saying, replace the igniter for our gas stove. And we found it and we ordered one, and 2 days later it arrived and we installed it ourselves. And I remember, you're right. I remember feeling so empowered, thinking if we had somebody come do this, it would have cost at least twice what we paid for it, because the part alone was $100.
Well, and that's, just to have any kind of human work person come to your house is at least in Florida, $120, like call out fee, right?
Right, exactly. Just to show up at your house.
Plus it's inconvenient. Like I try and do anything I can. Obviously I can't do everything. I'm not that good, but but I do as much as I can. And I feel definitely empowered by that. Like, because my daughter says, we don't need no men.
That leads right into our stories. And I love that you said that, because I was thinking about how our children see this and the stories that they tell as a result of seeing their moms and dads do something that may be a little bit unexpected or out of character for them, especially when they first start taking on those kinds of projects. So our theme today is really about when you're in one of those forced transitions, something that you didn't intend to happen or that you didn't foresee happening, whether that's the loss of a job or the loss of a marriage, and talking about those stories, about how we tell those stories to ourselves afterward, and the kind of stories we share with people afterward, and how people perceive us as a result of how we tell those stories.
Yeah, no, and that's very, very powerful, isn't it? You have to be really careful how you tell the story to other people, but most importantly, how you tell it to yourself internally, right?
Right. It's how people are going to perceive you. And on top of that, especially if you have children, they are watching and hearing everything you say. So for your daughter to see this happening and say, we don't need a man for this. It could very well have been somebody saying, we don't need to hire someone for this. It's not really about a gender thing, but just knowing that your daughter sees you as somebody who can accomplish a goal like that is kind of out of character.
Yeah, no, and she's good, and the boys are good too. I think that with every adversity comes a blessing that you definitely don't feel at the time when you're going through the adversity.
Right.
But as you get further away from that adversity, you see how empowering it was, how much you've grown from it, how much you've changed from it, how much you've learned from it. And even though I think I did like myself before my divorce, I most certainly like myself a lot better now since my divorce.
Yeah, it's funny how that happens. So when you think about that first time that you had to do something on a budget and you weren't really sure, you knew you could do it, but you had that concern. Do you remember that kind of moment of going, oh my gosh, I can totally do this? Do you remember a specific situation?
Yeah, I actually do, because I actually wrote about it in my book. And so I actually have a son called Max too.
Yay.
Yay. And he's my oldest son. And one of the things about going through transition or a divorce or whatever it is, you try and kind of, as hard as you can, make everything seem as normal as possible for your children. And so I remember It was my son's birthday, and he didn't ask for a party. He just presumed he was having a party because every year up until then, he and his brother and sister had parties. And I was just like beside myself because, parties are expensive. You get the bouncy castle and you get the whatever it is, or you take them to Chuck E. Cheese or whatever. They're like at least $300 to $500 depending on what you were doing. And at the time, I definitely didn't have money. I hadn't started Dreams Recycled. I was a complete mess. And I was like, how am I going to make a party, right? How am I going to have a party? And my son is one of those people. And I think most schools in America do this anyway. You can't invite like 5 people. You have to invite everyone in your classroom.
You don't want to leave anyone out. Yeah.
And so, I have 3 kids, and I think that his classroom had like 20 kids. So it would be like 23 kids. And then at that age, remember how like the little siblings would come.
Yeah.
And so it was never a problem before. I always had extra everything, and it was all fine, and I didn't care. And, if there were 50 kids running around, I had 50 goodie bags extra, and, enough pizza and God knows what else. And so I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I have like no money whatsoever. And I was like, okay, what can I do? What can I do? And so what I actually did is I did his entire birthday party for $25. I took out, because I collected like all the decorations from all the different parties. And I basically went through it all, and I took out everything that was yellow and blue or whatever it was, red and white, I can't remember. And I just used those color things, and it was all kind of mismatched, but it was cute because it was like fun and different. And we had, and I actually had a movie party for him. So I got a Redbox movie that was like $1 at the time. I made him, have you ever seen those cupcakes in ice cream cones that look like an ice cream cone, but it's actually a cupcake you bake in there with sprinkles and stuff? So I got like, a box of cake, and I got a thing of popcorn, and made homemade popcorn by the gallons. and I got them these little cardboard popcorn containers. And then the clever thing that I did was I realized I didn't have to feed them if I had it between like 2 and 4.
Right. So, it's not a mealtime.
Yeah. So they came, they had drinks, they had popcorn. I made lemonade. They had lemonade, popcorn, and the cake. And that was it. I mean, nobody knew. No one who came knew. We had decorations. We had people at the front pretending to take their movie tickets. I are very themed. And then they all went and they sat down at the movie, and then it was movie time. We turned the lights down, the movie came up, I can't remember what movie. And nobody had any idea. And it was one of the best parties that I think he ever had, if you had asked him.
Wow. I love that. That was so creative. So when was it, after the party itself, or was it, because a lot of times what I notice is that we have these pivotal moments that at the time we're not thinking of it in terms of a pivotal moment, but it's days or months or even a year later that you look back and go, oh my gosh, that was it. That was when I knew. Was it like that, or was it at the time of the event that you went, oh yes, I got this?
Yeah, I think actually it was after the party. I think during the party I was just stressed and maybe a little bit embarrassed that people would realize, that I didn't have any money. I'm like quite a private person, especially during divorce. Like most people, you don't really want to put everything out there.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I think it was afterwards when I was like, you know what? Those kids had just as good a time for $25 as for $500, right? Kids are actually very simple. Kids want to be with each other. They want to have fun. They want to interact. They want to play. And I think that after that, it was good because I actually took every birthday party I did for all my kids after that, and even still now. And I actually simplify a lot of things. And I think that it doesn't matter. I think that's not what counts.
I completely agree. And so you had a couple of aha moments as a result of that. One was that simple can be better because it's not the kids that care about all those details and expense. And the parents don't either. I mean, my experience, well, maybe that's because I raised my kids in Montana, where we don't have a Chuck E. Cheese in Helena. We do have places where people go over the top and do big parties, but in general, most of the people around here really do go simple. And I can tell you, as you were telling this story, I was imagining that if I had done something like that, my friends would have been over the top excited, saying, that was the coolest party. Oh my gosh, how much did you spend for that? Because I want to do something like that, and they'd be so proud that I was able to pull off a party like that for so little money. But I'm sure that in Florida, things are different.
Yeah, well, we live right by Universal and Disney, so everything here kid related is a little extreme usually. but I think that's why they liked it. And honestly, I think all parents are in the same boat. They're just happy if their kids are happy and they're having fun and they're safe, and and that's all you want, really.
Yeah, you don't need to show off.
Mm-mm.
So that was one of your aha moments, that you didn't need to do all those things because your kid was happy either way. And the other was probably that idea that, oh my gosh, I can do this. I have the capability and the mental capacity to be really creative on a budget.
Yeah, and it's like actually more like an obsession now. Because now, even though I could spend more money, I refuse to, because I'm like, oh, I wonder if I could do that for $500 or whatever. Like in my head, I set the budget, and then it's a challenge, and I enjoy it. And when it turns out really good, and people are like, oh my God, then I'm like, guess how much?
Then you have to share. Guess what I did? I know, it's so exciting. I love that too. That's so funny. So when you think back about other moments like that, when you had those realizations that you could do it, what was it that triggered this desire to start the Dreams Recycled? Where did that come from? What was the story behind it?
I mean, my personal story is, I think, like most people, you don't think you're going to get divorced. I don't believe that anyone gets married going, I better plan for, 18 years from now being in divorce court. And so when I got divorced, I mean, it's not shocking. Obviously, a lot of people get divorced, but you just don't have any plan B. And so I'd been out of the workforce for so long. I hadn't worked for close to 12 years. And
you hadn't had an income producing job.
Correct.
That's not the same thing as not working.
Yeah, I hadn't. Yeah.
Right.
And so I very quickly found out. I would go to recruiters and they'd be like, you're unemployable.
Oh.
And they would say things like, you probably need to go back to school or do all this other stuff that I had no money to do. And no time, and like I didn't have 4 years to go to school while I didn't have any income to figure out. And so I really just was like, oh my God. And I think that being so stressed, oddly, is part of the reason that I came up with this idea. I literally dreamt it. I had a really bad stress dream that I couldn't sell my engagement ring, and I was saying to people, can you buy my ring? And they were saying, I'll give you $1 or $2. Oh. And finally in my dream, I went, no, you don't understand. I have to feed my children. I'm just going to sell my ring and everyone else's on a website called Dreams Recycled. And that's literally how specific the dream was. And so, yeah, I woke up the next day and I thought that was odd. And I had already, I guess, realized through researching on the internet that there was no positive place to go to divorce. I mean, there was nowhere for divorce, and then there was definitely nowhere positive. And so I got up the next morning and I went on GoDaddy, like everyone does, and Dreams Recycled was $9.99. And so I was like, okay, it's, kismet or meant to be or whatever you want to call it. And I bought the domain, didn't know what I was doing, didn't know how I would do it, didn't know anything about the internet, didn't know anything about any of the stuff I do now. And I literally just did it on a wing of prayer.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love the idea of having that dream and taking action on it immediately. And you're right. I think there is some element of desperation to it. But at the same time, it's also what you said, it's kismet. It's one of those things that when it happens, either you jump on it or you let it go and you lose that dream. And I don't mean just the actual dream that you had, but I think in some ways, the dream pushed you enough to make a decision to take that action. I don't know a lot of people who act on their dreams.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like I really didn't have any other options. And I was like, I know my personality type, and, there probably was some minimum wage or low wage jobs I could have got. But I was a single mom of 3 kids. I mean, and they, at the time, 2 of them would have been in daycare. Don't know how I would have even paid for that, unless anything else. And so it was really kind of a mixture of circumstances, desperation, and the dream. And I was like, okay, well, what have I got to lose at this point?
What was the first thing you did as far as a service that you provided that somebody would pay you for?
Well, 13 days later, I created Dreams Recycled. I actually went to a company called Elance, where people bid for what you want them to do on the internet, because at the time I had no tech skills. And the website originally was the only marketplace in the world that specialized in selling things from your divorce. Yeah, and it still does that, and it still is the only one that does that. But what happened is when I put the marketplace up, and it came with a blog. So the people that designed it, they designed it with a blog, and they were like, "Oh, you should just write some stuff." And I was like, "What am I going to write? No one wants to hear my story." And so I started blogging on it, and my story went viral, I think, well, for multiple reasons, but it went viral, and I was really fortunate. I had a lot of people reach out, as we were talking about before, and say, "Oh my God, I love your story. Let me tell you mine." And it kind of grew from there as, articles, information, blogs. Now we have a directory of secondary resources. And in September, we just added an interactive community. So really now it's kind of like, if you think about it as the Facebook for divorce, that's what we are. We do everything. And it's always free for divorcees. And we love it. And it's super positive and like practical, because I'm a practical person. Like it's nice that we all talk about emotions and feelings and whatever, but really a lot of times when people are in desperate situations or going through life's adversity, people want like practical information where they go, okay, where do you start? Okay, let's go do this.
Yes.
Do this, do
like
that.
Going to YouTube to fix your stove.
Exactly.
Huh. So what was the first income producing service? Was it the auctioning off engagement rings?
Yeah, it was originally, our business model was that we charged 7% on the marketplace. Mm-hmm. And when people sold the dresses and rings, but we actually provide that service free now.
Wow.
Yeah. Because I was very adamant, in my story about the $25 cake thing and the birthday party. I mean, I'm very well aware that when you're going through a divorce, having any more people try and take money from you is not helpful, right? You've got lawyers, you've got moving houses, you've got daycare, you've got children, you've got, it's just overwhelming. And so when we recreated the website, which is now Dream Cycle 3.0, actually, this is the third kind of evolution. We have kind of shifted to all revenue ad model and partnership model. And so that enabled us to take the marketplace and make it a free service.
Wow. What a gift.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's really good. So
I love the thought behind that. I mean, that consideration of how are we going to make income without it coming from people who can't afford it?
Well, that's true. And I think it's better. I think it's better like that. I really go out of my way to help as many divorcees as I can, even one-on-one. Obviously I do have some one-on-one coaching clients that are paid. But I spoke to over 6,000 divorcees, and I can tell you the vast majority of them did not pay me. I did it because, I was in that situation, and I still do it because I was in that situation and I remember how it was. And you want to talk to somebody who gets it.
Right. That makes so much sense. I love that. And there's just so much to that in terms of what it brings to you and the modeling you're doing, not just for your children either, but for everyone around you. All of these divorcees that you've worked with without charging them and making that marketplace free for those people. You're modeling a behavior, you're modeling character, you're modeling generosity for others to see and understand, and hopefully not reciprocate directly, but pay it forward.
Well, and I think that's true. I always say I've never met a divorcee that wouldn't help another divorcee. And I think that there's a slight kind of irony that I really feel that I actually recycled my life by helping other divorcees recycle theirs. And so it's a nice kind of synergy. And I think you're a helper. You're somebody who coaches people and helps people. These are sometimes paid services or not, but they are ridiculously rewarding on an emotional level to the people who do them also, right?
Yes, that's absolutely true. And I just talked to somebody yesterday who does business coaching and consultation, and we were in complete agreement on that aspect of it, is that it's exhausting because you put so much emotion and love into it. So it gets emotionally exhausting, and at the same time, incredibly rewarding, knowing that you've made a difference enough so that somebody can start contributing again to their own lives and to their communities.
Absolutely. And I think, nobody ever has anything negative happen to them from giving, right?
Well, I don't know if I agree.
Well, maybe if it's extreme, like enabling, but that's a whole different thing.
Yes. And you're right. I mean, in general, giving is a positive aspect of life, and it makes us feel good to give. It generates oxytocin release in our brain. It literally releases feel-good drugs into our brain, and it's a lot cheaper and healthier than getting that from drugs. So yes, generosity and gratitude are both huge. And I think that's the other side of it that has to be added, is that if you're giving a lot, you also have to be grateful for something, because that balances it out. So there's a Jewish tradition of charity that the word mitzvah is loosely translated to good deed. And so in a Jewish traditional household or a practicing household, mitzvah is actually the actual translation is commandment. So it's kind of translated in our family as we're commanded to do good deeds. And which is great. We actually have what's called a tzedakah or charity box. We have 3 of them that we fill periodically with change, and if we find $1 in the laundry, it goes in the tzedakah box, and eventually we give it to some local charity. We really try to focus on our own community with those boxes. And the interesting thing about it is that there are 3 different levels to it. And the most basic level is that one person gives another person something. So I know who I'm giving it to, and they know who's gifted it to them. And that's the most basic level. If you want to improve upon that and get more kudos or more benefit spiritually, then you give to somebody that doesn't know that you gave to them. So you give anonymously, but you know who received it. And that's the second level. But the most valuable level of charity or mitzvah in the Jewish tradition is to give anonymously and receive anonymously.
Ah, okay, that's interesting.
And so I think what it does is it's more an idea of paying it forward.
Yeah.
So I don't know who I gifted this to, and they don't know who gifted it to me. So there's no ego involved in terms of that relationship. There's no relationship between the giver and the receiver except your own internal feeling of generosity and gratitude.
Yeah, no, I see that. I think that actually makes a lot of sense, right? There's, like I said, the pay it forward aspect is really powerful, and the anonymous part is definitely a good way to kind of get rid of the ego or the kind of look at me status, right? I've noticed on LinkedIn there's a lot of people who go on about how great they are.
Yeah, or how generous they are.
Yeah,
I love those. I'm like, if you have to tell people you're generous, you're probably doing it wrong.
That's too funny.
Well, let's finish up with one last story, because I am so enamored with this whole dreams recycled idea, particularly because I think of the phrase dreams recycled, and it kind of gives you this idea of taking something that you used and switching it and making it into something valuable again, that something that had lost its value somehow, and somehow you found its value again. So what was it? Do you have a story specifically related to one of the people that you helped that you remember vividly, that sense of her dreams are being recycled right now, that you could feel that spark?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a universal kind of emotion, right? I mean, we all go through multiple levels of adversity in our life, whether we think we do or not, whether it's divorce, job loss, sickness, losing someone, whatever it is, right? We are forced on many levels to recycle our lives multiple times. Even if you think of, empty nester or becoming a parent, we're always recycling our dreams. And so we've had so many people now, but some of my favorite stories are obviously people who've come to me kind of in very dire situations that, we can imagine, not dissimilar to mine, but probably much worse in some ways. People from abusive relationships or domestic violence situations or whatever it may be. And, and they come to you and you can just tell they're just completely broken, basically. And then working, with the information we have and talking to me and stuff, you see that switch in them. You see that light bulb moment where they no longer will be the victim and they're going to become the power. And whether it's, somebody who sold their house and actually took that money, sold their ring actually, and they took that money to buy their first ever house by themselves as a down payment. And, or it's someone who finally manages to get back into the workforce after, like me, 100 rejections, or whatever it may be.
Right.
And I think some of the sweetest stories are people who have been completely blindsided by their divorce. And they've done what I did and most divorcees, I think, do, which is like, I'm never getting married again. I'm never dating again. I'm never trusting anyone again. And then through working with Dreams Recycled and listening to our philosophy and being on our site, it's like osmosis. Positivity grows. It's like a muscle. The more you use it, the more it grows. And you see them, after they've sworn blindly that they will never move on and never do anything, I'll get like a little message that's like, you're never going to guess what, but would you like to come to our wedding? And you're just like, oh my God, like, that's so cool. It proves that, unfortunately, heartache and adversity is a human equalizer, but so is people going on to recycle their life is also a human equalizer. I mean, it's why people get married again. It's why people's businesses fail and then they restart a new one. It's why, people go on to do crazy things that they never thought they would. A lot of it comes from overcoming adversity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was just thinking about the fact that when we recorded our podcast for Dreams Recycled, that we talked a little bit about the fact that when you are surrounding yourself with these positive conversation content, as opposed to going with a bunch of divorcees out and complaining, making it a big complaint fest, you're actually helping these people be able to see positivity as an option, where when they go out on a date for the first time or for the 30th time and they haven't given up yet, and instead of talking badly about their ex, they're talking about how resilient they've become, or they're telling a story about how they fixed their own washing machine by watching YouTube, and then they are opening up this possibility of a new positive relationship because they're not telling themselves this sad story over and over and over again.
Absolutely. And I think there's something really special about learning from other people who have been through the journey. So when people go on Dreams Recycled, they might be in, stage kind of ground zero of the process. And then they read stories from people who are like, stage 4, 5, 6, 7 or whatever.
Or even 2 or 3, knowing that they're going to be there soon.
Yeah, and they see that there is light at the end of the tunnel. They see that there is hope. And that's ultimately what we do, give people hope and validation that things will not just be all right, but they're actually going to be pretty awesome if you just stick to it, right?
Right. Make that choice to think that way. Yeah, I love that. And I'm just going to share one quick story about, and I've shared this before, but I think it's such a powerful one for me and a pivot point for me that it might bring some of this home for some of our listeners. We moved to Montana from Washington, D.C. with a 6-month-old baby, and we moved for a job for my husband. We just decided that one of us needed to stay home with the baby more, because both of us went back to work when the baby was little, because we were living in DC. We couldn't afford to. And we moved to Helena, Montana, and my husband took a $10,000 pay cut, and I gave up my career, which was a significant, that was, we were living on less than half of what we had been living on. And the cost of living is not 50% less here. And,
I was wondering,
No. And we ended up, we bought this house a year later, and then we had another baby a year after that. And it was about a year after that his organization went under. And my husband's boss negotiated, I think, 3 months of half salary for my husband and his other colleague, so that they could, gradually find a new job and not be totally, completely out of money. And so on November 5th, we were notified that the November 15th paycheck was going to be half. And I remember, yes. And I don't usually panic. I'm one of those people that I just figure it out as I hit an obstacle, I figure out how to get around it. And we did okay for a little while. And I had started my own business when we moved here, going to people's homes and officing them on their computers, doing function work. So I had income here and there, maybe $100 a week that I was making, which of course isn't even enough for 4 people. But the moment that that really struck me was I had lived like that by myself, and it was stressful. I would go a couple days without eating when I was in college because I just didn't have money to go buy groceries. But when I went to the grocery store one day, I left the babies with my neighbor, and I went to the grocery store, and I remember standing in front of the cooler and a tear dribbling down my face because I couldn't decide between buying milk or eggs that day.
Oh.
I just remember that feeling of overwhelm. And I had held it together up to that point. This was about 2.5 months into the 4 months that we were on half salary. And I remember choosing milk because I knew it seemed more versatile. I knew we had cereal at the house. I knew I could make macaroni and cheese with it. And I remember coming home and having this moment of watching the boys get all excited to have cereal for dinner. And I was appalled, oh my gosh, we're going to have cereal for dinner. And the boys were so excited about it. And I sat at the table and the boys are eating cereal for dinner and they think it's this novelty thing. And I looked across the table at my husband and I got this big smile on my face, realizing that it was going to be okay. That we were all together and that I had made the right choice on milk. And it's those moments, I think, that we have to trust ourselves, that we are resilient, that we have the evidence to support that.
And I think we stress too much, right? We stress too much about the little stuff. Like you said, the things that are ultimately really important is your health, your family, your children. Obviously, feeding them is helpful. But
yes.
I mean, ultimately, that's it. Jobs come and go, houses come and go, other things come and go. But as long as you have your primary relationships and health, you're blessed.
Right. And you'll make it work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Tiffany Ann, this was such a pleasure. I love chatting with you. This is our third conversation, and I'm excited for a future one, probably in the next few weeks when we catch up again, just to catch up.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. Your stories don't define you. How you tell them will. For our listeners, we will have a blog post associated with the podcast on iTunes and on my website, elkinsconsulting.com. And I'll definitely have some links in there for you to follow to the Dreams Recycled website, to Tiffany Ann's book, and to connect with her on LinkedIn. So thank you again, Tiffany Ann.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You. How you share them will. Please visit my website for more podcast episodes, blog posts, and information about how I can help you develop and share your stories at elkinsconsulting.com.
How could you tell me that you're going away? Don't say